The morning began like any other for her. The sky was clear, the road stretched ahead, and the world felt quiet. She had just finished her night shift at the small-town clinic and was driving home, tired but calm. The streets were mostly empty, with a few cars passing now and then. Her mind drifted between the day's patients and the thought of finally resting once she got home. She took the same route every day, a long stretch of road surrounded by trees on both sides. It was peaceful, and she often enjoyed that silence. But that morning something felt different. The air seemed heavier. As she drove a little further, she noticed a thin trail of smoke rising in the distance. At first she thought someone might be burning dry leaves, but within seconds she saw the orange flicker of fire. Her heart began to race. She pressed harder on the pedal, unsure of what she was about to find. When she reached closer, she saw a large black SUV crashed against a metal barrier. Flames were creeping from under the hood, and thick smoke filled the air. The sound of crackling fire mixed with faint cries that made her stomach twist. Without thinking twice, she pulled her small car to the side of the road and jumped out. The heat from the burning vehicle hit her face immediately. She could barely see through the smoke, but she could hear it clearly. A child's cry coming from the back seat. Her heart pounded harder. There was no one else around yet. No sirens, no help. Just her. She ran to the driver's side first, but the door was crushed and jammed shut. The front seats were empty. She ran around to the other side, coughing as smoke filled her lungs. Through the back window, she saw a small figure strapped in a car seat, kicking and crying. Too young to understand what was happening. Her hands shook as she tried the door, but it wouldn't open. She pulled harder, her skin stinging from the heat. For a second she almost gave up, but the sound of that child's cry pushed her on. She glanced around and spotted a large rock near the edge of the road. Without hesitation, she grabbed it and smashed it against the window. The glass shattered, and a burst of hot air and smoke blew out toward her. She coughed, covered her mouth with her sleeve, and reached inside. The metal buckle was hot, burning her fingers as she tried to unfasten the seatbelt. The little one was crying louder now, terrified and reaching for her. She could barely see through the smoke, her eyes watering, her breath short. The fire was spreading fast, and she knew she had only seconds before it was too late. Finally, the buckle released. She pulled the child free, wrapping the little one tightly in her arms. The moment she stepped back, there was a loud pop. The windshield cracked, and the fire flared up even more. She stumbled backward, coughing hard but refusing to let go. She ran a few meters away and laid the child on the grass beside the road. The toddler's face was covered in soot, eyes red from the smoke but still breathing. She checked the child quickly. No visible burns, just shaking and crying in fear. Relief flooded her, and her own knees gave out as she sat down, gasping for air. Within minutes, another car stopped. A man jumped out, shouting in panic. His suit jacket flew off as he ran toward them. His face went pale the moment he saw the child, and his voice broke as he called out. He dropped to his knees beside them, holding the little one close. She realized immediately, he must be the father. He looked at her, his expression filled with disbelief and gratitude all at once. "You saved my child," he said in a trembling voice, but she could barely respond. Her throat was burning, and she was still coughing. He wanted to thank her, to say something more, but the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Fire trucks and an ambulance arrived, and everything turned into noise and movement. The firefighters rushed to put out the flames. The paramedics came over to check the child and her. One of them guided her to the ambulance, asking questions, shining a light into her eyes, checking her pulse. She waved them off, saying she was fine. She wasn't thinking about herself at all. She kept looking toward the man and the child, making sure they were safe. The man refused to let go of the little one, holding the child against his chest. His hands were shaking, his eyes red, not from the smoke but from the shock of what could have been. He looked at her again, still trying to find the right words. But words didn't seem enough. When the firefighters finally put out the flames, only the black shell of the SUV remained. The air smelled of burnt rubber and metal. Reporters began arriving, snapping photos, asking questions. Someone pointed at her, saying she was the one who saved the child. She quickly turned away. She didn't want the attention. She didn't feel like a hero. The paramedics insisted she should go to the hospital for a proper checkup. She agreed only because her throat was sore, and her hands had small burns from touching the hot metal. When she was about to step into the ambulance, the man approached her again. He placed his hand gently on her arm. "I'll never forget what you did today," he said softly. His voice was calm now, but his eyes still carried the weight of fear and relief. "You saved my entire world." She smiled faintly and shook her head. "Anyone would have done the same." He stared at her for a moment, realizing she truly believed that. But he knew better. Not everyone would have run toward a burning car. Not everyone would risk their life for a stranger. At the hospital, she was treated for minor smoke inhalation and small burns. The doctors told her she was lucky. While resting, she thought about the little child and hoped they were okay. The news that night covered the story briefly. "A young nurse saves a toddler from a burning car," the headline read. They didn't mention her name because she had refused to give it. She didn't want fame or attention. She just wanted life to go back to normal. But for the man whose child she saved, nothing felt normal anymore. That single moment changed everything for him. He was a man used to control, power, and influence. Yet in those terrifying minutes, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the tiny life that had been in that burning car, and the stranger who had given him back what he could never replace. The next morning, while she sat by her window drinking tea, trying to forget the images of the fire, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, a man in a dark suit stood there, polite but serious. He introduced himself as an assistant to someone important. He handed her an envelope and said his employer wanted to meet her to personally thank her. She hesitated. She didn't want to be drawn into attention or public gratitude. She told the man she appreciated it but didn't need any thanks. The assistant smiled, nodded, and left the envelope anyway before walking away. Inside was a simple note written in elegant handwriting. "I owe you more than I can ever express. Please allow me the chance to thank you in person. AR." She folded the note quietly and set it aside. She wasn't sure what to do. Part of her wanted to stay invisible. The other part wondered about the man behind those initials, the one whose face she couldn't forget. Later that evening, she went back to her usual routine. She cleaned the small apartment, made dinner, and tried to focus on ordinary things. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the fire again. She saw the small child's terrified eyes, the man's trembling hands, and the way he looked at her as if she had done something impossible. Over the next few days, life slowly returned to normal, or at least it seemed that way. People at the clinic heard about what happened. Her coworkers hugged her, proud and amazed. But she brushed it off, saying she just did what anyone would have done. Deep down, though, she knew it had changed her. Not because of the attention, but because of the reminder that life could turn in an instant, and sometimes, courage was simply doing the right thing even when no one was watching. On the other side of the city, the man whose child she saved couldn't stop thinking about her. He kept replaying that moment, how she ran toward the danger while others stayed back. He had built his life on power and control. But in that one terrifying minute, a stranger had reminded him of something deeper: kindness, bravery, and the value of a single human life. He decided he wouldn't rest until he found a way to repay her. Not with money, but with something lasting, something worthy of what she had done. And while she didn't know it yet, their paths were about to cross again, this time not by chance, but by choice. The week after the accident felt strangely quiet. She went back to work at the small clinic, hoping things would return to normal, but something inside her had changed. Every time she heard an ambulance siren, her chest tightened. Sometimes when she closed her eyes, she could still see the flames, feel the heat on her face, and hear that child's cry echoing in her mind. Her coworkers tried to make her smile. They kept saying how brave she was, calling her a hero, but she didn't feel like one. To her, it was just a moment when she had to act. Anyone with a heart would have done it. Yet deep down, she knew that not everyone would have run toward fire the way she did. One afternoon, she was finishing her shift when the head nurse came to her desk with a puzzled look. "Someone's here to see you," she said. A man in a suit. Her first thought was that it must be someone from the hospital administration, but when she walked out to the small waiting area, she froze. It was the same man from the accident, the child's father. He looked different now, calm but serious, his face still carrying traces of something heavy. He stood up as soon as he saw her. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said politely. She shook her head, still unsure what to say. "I tried to find you for days," he continued. "You left the hospital so quickly. I needed to see you again, to thank you properly." She smiled faintly, trying to make it light. "You already did that back on the road. I'm just glad your child is okay." He nodded, his expression softening. They're fine now. The doctors said it's a miracle there were no serious injuries. You gave me back my entire world that day. She looked down, embarrassed by his words. I just did what I could. That's all. He hesitated for a moment, then took a small envelope from his pocket and placed it on the counter. This is just a small token. Please don't refuse. She stepped back slightly. I can't accept anything, she said quickly. I don't want money. It's not money, he replied gently. It's an invitation. My company is hosting a small charity dinner next week for the Children's Hospital. I'd be honored if you came as my guest. No speeches, no attention. Just dinner. She hesitated again, unsure. Crowds made her nervous, and the thought of being surrounded by people who probably lived in a very different world than hers made her uncomfortable. But there was something in his eyes, sincere, almost pleading. After a moment, she nodded. All right, she said quietly. He smiled for the first time, a real grateful smile. Thank you. I'll send someone to pick you up. After he left, she sat down for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. A charity dinner sounded far removed from her simple life. She wasn't sure she belonged there, but something told her that maybe it was important to go. When the evening of the dinner came, she almost changed her mind. She stood in front of the mirror wearing the only decent dress she owned, a simple blue one, and kept wondering if it was too plain. But when she stepped outside, a black car was already waiting. The driver greeted her respectfully and opened the door. The event was held at a grand hotel downtown. The lobby glittered with lights and laughter. Men in suits and women in elegant dresses filled the room, talking in soft voices, glasses of wine in their hands. She felt small and out of place among them. But the moment she entered, the man spotted her from across the room. He walked over immediately, smiling warmly. You came, he said, as if he hadn't been sure she would. I said I would, she replied softly. He introduced her to a few people, but he didn't let anyone make a big deal out of her presence. True to his word, there were no speeches, no cameras, no public attention. He made sure she was comfortable, guiding her through conversations, making her laugh once or twice. For the first time since the accident, she felt like she could breathe again. During dinner, they talked quietly about ordinary things: work, family, life in the city. He told her how his business had grown over the years, but also how success had made him forget simple things. That day reminded me of what's real, he said. You showed me something I hadn't felt in a long time, human kindness without reason. She looked at him, surprised by his honesty. I think everyone has kindness in them, she said. They just forget to use it, he nodded thoughtfully. Maybe you're right. But you didn't forget. You acted when no one else did. That's rare. The evening went by more smoothly than she expected. When it was time to leave, he insisted on driving her himself. The city lights shimmered outside as the car moved through the quiet streets. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was peaceful. As they stopped outside her building, he turned to her. I know you don't like attention, but please, if you ever need anything at all, just call me. She smiled. I don't think I'll need anything, but thank you. He looked at her for a moment longer, as if he wanted to say more, but then just nodded. Good night. She watched the car drive away, wondering why his words lingered in her mind long after he was gone. In the days that followed, she went back to her normal routine again. But this time there were small reminders of that night. The warmth in his voice, the kindness in his eyes. She didn't know why she couldn't stop thinking about it. Then one afternoon, a delivery arrived at the clinic, a bouquet of fresh lilies with a small card that said, For the woman who reminded me what courage looks like. There was no name on it, but she knew who it was from. Her co-workers teased her gently, asking if she had a secret admirer, but she only smiled and said nothing. She didn't want to explain. Meanwhile, on his side of the city, he found himself drawn to thoughts of her more often than he expected. He was a man surrounded by people every day, yet he couldn't forget the look in her eyes when she had pulled his child out of danger. It wasn't just bravery. It was the kind of quiet strength he rarely saw. He began to check on her quietly through his assistant, not to invade her privacy, but to make sure she was doing well. He learned she worked long shifts, often staying late to cover for others. He also found out she lived alone in a small apartment and never complained about anything. The more he learned, the more respect he felt for her. One evening, after a long day at work, he visited the children's hospital where the charity funds were going. As he walked through the wards seeing children recovering, he thought again about how easily life could change in seconds. He decided then that he wanted to do something meaningful, not just for her but for others like her who gave without asking anything in return. A few days later, she received a letter at the clinic. It wasn't fancy, just neatly written on plain paper. Inside was a message that said, "I know you don't want rewards, but please allow me to help in a way that helps others too. I'd like to make a donation to your clinic in your name. You don't have to say yes, but I hope you will." She read the note several times, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to say no. She didn't want her act to become a story about charity or recognition, but another part of her realized how much the clinic struggled, how many patients they had to turn away because they lacked supplies. Maybe his help could make a real difference. After thinking for 2 days, she finally wrote back, thanking him and agreeing on one condition, that the donation be anonymous. He smiled when he received her message. It was exactly the answer he expected from her. Weeks passed and the clinic started receiving new equipment, medicines, and better facilities. Everyone wondered where the funds came from, but she kept her promise and said nothing. Watching the patients get better care made her heart full. She didn't need anyone to know where it came from. It was enough to see the change. Sometimes he would call just to ask how she was doing. Their conversations were short, friendly, but slowly they began to grow longer. They started sharing little stories about his travels, her patients, the small joys of daily life. There was an unspoken comfort between them, as if the fire that had once brought them together had burned away the distance between their worlds. One evening, as she left work, she found him waiting by his car outside. He said he was in the neighborhood and wanted to see how the clinic looked after the improvements. They walked around together and she showed him everything quietly. He listened, genuinely interested, asking questions, smiling at the sight of children playing in the waiting area. When they stepped outside, the evening sun was soft, painting the sky gold. He looked at her and said, "You were right. Kindness really can change things." She smiled gently. "It always could. People just forget how powerful it is." He nodded, his gaze warm. "I don't think I'll ever forget again." As they stood there in the fading light, neither of them said anything more. But in that silence, something deep and unspoken passed between them. A bond that had begun with fire and fear, now growing quietly into trust and understanding. Neither of them knew what the future held, but one thing was certain. The moment she ran toward that burning car had changed both of their lives forever, and their story was only beginning to unfold. The months passed quietly after the donation to the clinic. Life began to find its rhythm again. She was busier than ever, but it was a good kind of busy. The new supplies helped more patients get treatment, and the small team she worked with finally had what they needed to do their jobs properly. Every day she saw small signs of change, smiles on patients' faces, quicker recoveries, and a lighter atmosphere in the clinic. Sometimes she would catch herself wondering about him, the man whose life had crossed paths with hers in such an unexpected way. They spoke occasionally, but he never pushed beyond what felt comfortable. He was always respectful, always calm, and somehow always knew when she needed encouragement. One evening, after a long shift, she received a call from him. His voice was warm but slightly tired. "I know you've been working too much," he said gently. "Would you mind joining me for dinner this weekend?" "Just dinner, nothing fancy." She hesitated, smiling faintly. "You really don't take no for an answer, do you?" "Not when it comes to saying thank you properly," he replied, laughing softly. After a moment, she agreed. It wasn't that she wanted to be treated. She just didn't want to seem unkind, but deep down she was curious. There was something about him that drew her in, not his power or wealth, but the way he listened, the way he made every word feel sincere. The dinner was simple, just as he promised. He had chosen a quiet restaurant by the waterfront. The soft sound of waves filled the air, and the glow of small lights made the place feel peaceful. When she arrived, he stood up immediately, greeting her with the same warmth he always carried in his eyes. They talked for hours, not about business or money, but about life. He told her how the accident had changed him, how he'd begun to slow down, spend more time with his child, and appreciate the moments he once took for granted. "I used to think success meant never stopping," he said, looking out toward the water. Now I know success means knowing when to stop and breathe. She nodded. Sometimes we only realize what matters when we almost lose it. He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. You sound like someone who's learned that the hard way. She smiled gently, then looked down at her hands. Maybe. I've seen enough people in pain to understand how short life can be. For a few moments, they both stayed quiet, listening to the waves. There was a calmness between them that didn't need words. After dinner, he insisted on driving her home again. On the way, they talked about small things. The city lights, her patience, his favorite childhood memories. She laughed when he told her about the time he got lost at a carnival as a boy, and cried until a stranger returned him to his parents. Looks like you've always had someone saving you, she teased. He smiled. Maybe I have, but this time I got lucky with who it was. She shook her head, laughing softly. You're still trying to make me feel like a hero? You are one, he said simply. The sincerity in his tone made her pause. She didn't know how to answer, so she just looked out the window, watching the city blur past. After that evening, their connection grew stronger, though neither of them spoke about it openly. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was deep. He would visit the clinic sometimes, bringing small boxes of supplies or new books for the waiting area. Each time he said it was a donation from his foundation, but everyone could see the way his eyes softened whenever she thanked him. She tried to keep things professional, but it wasn't easy. There was a quiet understanding between them, something that went beyond words. She admired his kindness and how he used his influence to help others now. He admired her honesty, her strength, and how she stayed humble despite everything. One evening, the clinic organized a small community event to celebrate its improvements. She didn't know he was coming, but when she saw him standing near the entrance talking to one of the staff members, her heart skipped slightly. He wasn't dressed like a powerful man that day, just a simple shirt and rolled-up sleeves. When he saw her, he smiled in a way that felt familiar, almost comforting. I thought I'd stop by and see the difference you've made, he said. The difference we made. She corrected him. He nodded. Then I'm honored to be part of it. The event went beautifully. Families from the neighborhood came, children played outside, and laughter filled the air. For her, it was one of those rare moments when everything felt right. When the evening ended and the crowd thinned, they found themselves sitting on the clinic steps, looking at the stars. It's strange, she said softly, how one moment can change everything. He looked at her. Do you ever wish that moment never happened? She thought about it. The fire, the fear, the child's cry, it had all been terrifying. But if it hadn't happened, she wouldn't have met him. She wouldn't have seen how kindness could ripple through so many lives. No, she said finally. I don't wish that. It reminded me what life is for. He nodded slowly as if her words meant more than she realized. You remind me of that every time I see you. They sat in silence for a while after that. The night air was cool and the streetlights cast a soft glow around them. Neither of them wanted to break the peace. In the weeks that followed, they continued to see each other. Sometimes he'd stop by the clinic for coffee. Other times they'd meet at a nearby park just to talk. The child he adored so much was growing fast and often asked about the lady who helped. It made her smile every time he mentioned it. One afternoon, he invited her to visit his office. She hesitated at first, not wanting to feel out of place, but he assured her it wasn't formal. When she arrived, she was surprised by how modest his space was. Warm colors, simple art, and a few family photos on the shelf. He showed her a new project his company was planning, a foundation that would fund small medical centers in rural areas. It's inspired by your clinic, he said. By you, actually. She looked at him, startled. By me? He nodded. You showed me that small efforts can save lives. Not everything needs to be grand to matter. She didn't know what to say. The idea that her work had inspired something so big left her speechless. That's really kind, she finally whispered. It's the truth, he said simply. I want to keep helping, not because I owe you, but because it feels right now. That night, she walked home feeling lighter than she had in months. It wasn't just about the donation or the clinic. It was about the way two lives from completely different worlds could come together and create something meaningful. But not everyone around them understood it. Some people at the clinic began to whisper. They wondered why a man like him visited so often, what his real intentions were. She tried to ignore it, but sometimes the words reached her ears and made her uneasy. One afternoon, she told him about it. "People are starting to talk," she said softly. "I don't want them to think I'm getting special treatment." He looked genuinely troubled. "I didn't mean to cause that. Maybe I should stay away for a while." She shook her head. "That's not what I meant. I just don't want misunderstandings. The clinic is about helping people, not rumors." He nodded slowly. "I understand. But for what it's worth, I'll never stop being grateful to you, even if I have to show it from a distance." His words carried a quiet sadness. She felt it too. It wasn't easy to explain what their bond was. It wasn't love, at least not in the usual sense. It was something deeper, something built on trust, gratitude, and shared understanding. Over the next few weeks, he kept his promise and didn't visit as often, but he never disappeared completely. He still called sometimes, checking on her, making sure everything was all right. Each time she heard his voice, she felt a small warmth inside her chest. Then one rainy evening, as she was closing the clinic, a familiar car pulled up. He stepped out, holding an umbrella, his face worried. "I heard one of your patients needed emergency transport tonight," he said quickly. "I came to help." She blinked, surprised but relieved. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he interrupted gently. Together, they helped the small medical team load the patient into the ambulance. The rain poured heavily, soaking them both, but neither seemed to care. When the ambulance drove off, they stood there for a moment, drenched and silent. Finally, she looked at him, water dripping from her hair. "You really don't give up, do you?" He smiled faintly. "Not when it comes to doing the right thing." She couldn't help but laugh softly. "Maybe that's why we met." "Maybe it is," he said quietly. The rain kept falling around them, but somehow it felt peaceful. For a long moment, they just stood there, two people who had found something rare in a world that often forgot what kindness meant. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew that their story was far from over. Something was changing, slowly, gently, but deeply. Days passed, then weeks, but their connection didn't fade. It wasn't something they had planned or forced. It just happened naturally. What began as gratitude slowly turned into a bond that both of them couldn't quite explain. The woman had gone back to her normal life at the hospital, working long shifts, helping patients, living modestly, and keeping to herself. But every now and then, her phone would buzz with a message from him. Sometimes just a check-in, sometimes a small update about his child. He never tried to intrude into her life. He never overstepped. It was always with a certain kind of respect, the kind that comes from deep admiration. And each time she received his message, she smiled without meaning to. She had never been close to someone like him before. He was powerful, well-known, and wealthy beyond her imagination. But when he spoke to her, none of that mattered. He didn't act superior. He listened. He cared. One evening after her shift, she was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, exhausted. The fluorescent lights made everything look dull, and her coffee had already gone cold. She scrolled through her messages, her eyes catching on his name again. He had sent a picture, his little boy, laughing while trying to feed their family dog. Underneath, he wrote, "He still remembers the woman who carried him out of the fire." She looked at that picture for a long moment. Something about it filled her with warmth. She could still remember that day so clearly. The heat, the smoke, the fear. But now, seeing the child smiling and full of life, it felt like the world had come full circle. She replied with a simple line, "I'm glad he's happy and safe." A few days later, she was surprised to see him waiting outside the hospital. He was leaning against his car, dressed simply, no security around. He waved when he saw her, and there was something so genuine in his expression that it caught her off guard. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, almost shyly. "I just wanted to ask if you'd have dinner with us. My son's been asking about you again." She hesitated for a moment, but his tone was so sincere that she agreed. That evening, she found herself sitting at a long dining table, across from the same child whose life she had once held in her arms. He was bright, cheerful, and endlessly curious. He showed her his toy cars, his drawings, and even the small scar on his knee from falling off his bicycle. As she listened to him talk, she realized how different this world was from hers, but also how natural it felt to be there. The powerful man watched them quietly, occasionally smiling when their laughter filled the room. It wasn't the kind of night she had imagined, but it was peaceful, warm, and strangely healing. Over the next few months, their connection deepened. He invited her to visit a few of his projects, charity homes, shelters, and schools that his foundation supported. She was moved by how involved he was, how he took time to know the people his work affected. It changed the way she saw him. He wasn't just a man with influence. He was someone trying to use that power for good. One day, while walking through a community center his foundation had built, he turned to her and said, "I've been thinking about your dream. The clinic you mentioned. You said you wanted to build a small one for families who can't afford health care." She looked at him, surprised. "That was just an idea," she said softly. "It's too big for me." He shook his head. "Not too big. Just waiting for the right time. Let me help you make it real." She stared at him, unsure of what to say. She didn't want to feel like she owed him anything. But he must have sensed her hesitation because he added, "This isn't about paying you back. It's about doing something meaningful together. You saved my son's life. You reminded me what life really means. I just want to support your kindness with the resources I have." His words stayed with her long after that day. She thought about them during her shifts, during the quiet hours, at night when the hospital hallways were still and the only sounds were distant monitors beeping. Part of her wanted to believe him, but another part feared what accepting such help might mean. Finally, one evening she agreed. They started planning together, choosing the location, designing the space, meeting architects and local officials. It was hard work, but it brought them closer. They shared long days filled with conversations, laughter, and a growing sense of partnership. There were moments when they disagreed. She wanted things simple and practical, while he sometimes aimed for something grander. But even in disagreement, there was respect. He admired her honesty. She admired his persistence. The day the foundation stone was laid, the little boy held her hand tightly, smiling up at her. Cameras flashed. Reporters called out, but she stayed calm, trying to stay out of the spotlight. When one journalist asked who she was, the man simply said, "She's the reason this place exists." Later that evening, after the crowd had left and the sun had gone down, they stood by the site, the air cool and quiet. The woman looked around and said softly, "I never thought my life would lead here." He smiled. "Neither did I," he said. "Sometimes life brings two people together not by chance but by purpose." There was something in the way he said it that made her heart skip. She didn't know if it was just gratitude in his eyes or something deeper, but she looked away, unsure what to say. For a moment, silence said everything. In the following months, their friendship grew stronger. They called each other often, shared meals, and spent weekends at the clinic site, checking progress. The man's child grew attached to her, always, running to her when she arrived, showing her drawings and little gifts he made. She became part of their world, almost like family. Despite that closeness, she always stayed humble. She never sought attention or recognition. The man admired that more than anything. He had known people who chased fame and fortune all his life, but she was different. She didn't need anything from him, and that's what made him want to give her everything. Sometimes when the day ended, they would sit outside together, watching the sunset. He'd talk about his business, how stressful it used to be, how he had lost touch with what mattered. "I used to think power meant control," he once said quietly. "But when I saw you run into that fire, I realized power means nothing without heart." She smiled faintly. "We all have something we can give," she said. "Sometimes it's not money or influence. It's just courage for one small moment." Those words stayed with him for days. He began to see life differently, more simply, more humanly. He spent less time at big meetings, more time with his child, more time visiting the clinic construction site. The people around him noticed the change. He seemed lighter, more peaceful. One night during a quiet dinner, he told her something that took her by surprise. "You changed me," he said softly. "You made me see the kind of person I want to be, not the one the world expects me to be." She looked at him, unsure what to say. "I didn't do anything special," she said. He smiled gently. "You did more than you know." By the time the clinic neared completion, their bond had become something unspoken but deep. It wasn't about romance, not yet. It was about connection, respect, and gratitude woven into something more profound. They understood each other without needing words. When the first walls of the clinic were painted and the signboard went up, he stood beside her, watching workers move around. "You built this," he said. She shook her head. "We built this." In that moment, both of them knew this was no longer about repaying a debt. It was about building something that would outlive them both. A place born from Kura. Kindness and second chances. The powerful man who once thought life was measured by wealth now found meaning in a woman who had nothing but a good heart. And the woman who once thought she was just ordinary discovered that her act of bravery had rippled far beyond that one moment on the roadside. They didn't need to say anything else. The world had already changed for them both, quietly, beautifully, forever. The new clinic opened on a quiet morning in spring. The air smelled of fresh paint, and the glass doors still had streaks where the workers had cleaned them the night before. A few people stood outside holding flowers and smiling. Children ran around, playing, unaware that they were standing in front of something built from courage, kindness, and gratitude. Inside, the woman stood by the front desk, her hands trembling slightly as she looked around. Every detail felt unreal. The white walls, the bright lights, the rows of beds waiting for patients. It was exactly what she had once imagined during her long shifts at the hospital. Back when it was only a dream, she whispered to herself. The man walked in quietly, his little boy holding his hand. The boy's laughter echoed through the hall as he pointed to the colorful mural on the wall. A painting of trees, sunlight, and people holding hands. The man stopped next to her, his face calm but proud. "You did it," he said softly. She turned to him and smiled. "We did it." He shook his head slightly. "No, you're the reason this place exists. You made me believe that something like this could happen." For a moment, neither spoke. The sunlight from the big windows spread across the floor, filling the room with a golden glow. It felt peaceful, like the world had finally come to rest. Later, during the opening ceremony, local families gathered. The mayor gave a short speech. The media took pictures, but she barely noticed. Her eyes kept finding the faces of the people who would soon come here for help. Mothers holding their babies, old men sitting quietly, children clinging to their parents. That was who she had built it for. After the event, she stepped outside for some air. The crowd had started to leave, and everything around her felt still again. The man followed her out, standing beside her in silence for a while. He looked at her and said, "Do you know what I was thinking about this morning?" She glanced at him. "What?" "The day of the accident," he said. "I can still see it clearly. The fire, the noise. And then you, running toward danger while everyone else ran away. That moment changed my entire life." She looked down, not sure what to say. "I didn't think," she said quietly. "I just saw a child in danger and ran." He nodded. "That's the difference between people like you and people like me. You act from the heart. You don't calculate, you just do what's right. I used to think power was about control, about having everything under command. But you showed me that real strength is doing something even when you're afraid." She smiled faintly. "You would have done the same." He looked at her for a moment, then said softly, "I'm not sure I would have. But because of you, I want to be that kind of person now." The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. For a moment, she saw not the powerful man everyone else knew, but a father who had been broken and rebuilt by one act of kindness. Days turned into weeks. The clinic started receiving patients, and soon it was full every day. The woman spent long hours there, sometimes staying late into the night. She never complained. She greeted every person who walked in with a gentle smile and a calm word. The man visited often too, not to check on the project, but to sit quietly, talk to people, and see how everything was going. He never made speeches there. He didn't act like the owner or a benefactor. He simply blended in, helping where he could, carrying boxes, talking to children, sometimes serving water to the staff. The woman noticed this change and admired it deeply. One evening after everyone had left, they sat in her small office. The table was cluttered with files, and a half-empty cup of tea sat near the edge. Outside, the sky had turned orange and purple. "You look tired," he said. She laughed softly. "I am, but it's a good kind of tired," he smiled. "You've created something that gives life to others." "You should be proud," she nodded. "I am, but I couldn't have done it without you." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Maybe not, but you gave it purpose. You gave me purpose." There was a quiet pause after that. Neither knew what to say next. The air between them was full of something unspoken, not heavy, not uncertain, but warm, like a gentle promise neither dared to put into words. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. "You know," he said slowly, "I spent years chasing things that didn't matter. More money, more deals, more control, but none of it ever made me feel the way I do when I walk through this place." She listened quietly. "When I see people smiling here, when I see your staff helping strangers without expecting anything back, that's when I understand what real success is," he said. "You showed me that." She walked over and stood beside him. The city lights had started to come on, glowing softly in the distance. "I didn't show you anything," she said. "You just needed a reminder." He turned to her, his eyes kind. "Then you were that reminder, and I'll be grateful for the rest of my life." Their eyes met for a moment longer than usual, and something passed between them, not words, but a deep understanding that went beyond gratitude. In the months that followed, their lives continued to intertwine. They worked together, supported each other, and slowly the line between friendship and something deeper began to blur. But they never rushed it. It was not a love born of romance, but of respect and shared humanity. Every now and then, the man's child would visit the clinic, running through the hallways, waving to the doctors and nurses. The woman always stopped to talk to him, her face lighting up with affection. It was impossible not to feel close to the child who had brought them together in the first place. One evening after the clinic had closed, she walked into the garden outside. The man was already there, sitting on a bench under the old tree. The lights from the building spilled across the grass, and the night air was cool and calm. He looked up as she approached and smiled. "I was waiting for you," he said. "Why?" she asked. "I wanted to tell you something," he said. "I've been thinking about the future, about what happens when we're gone. I've arranged something. The clinic will be funded permanently. It will run in your name forever." She froze. "In my name?" He nodded. "Yes, you deserve that. You're the reason this place exists." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't have to do that," he smiled gently. "I want to. This isn't about repaying you anymore. It's about making sure the good you started never ends." She looked at him, unable to speak. All the moments they had shared, from the day of the fire to this quiet night, came rushing back. She finally said, "You've already done more than enough." He shook his head. "Not enough to match what you gave me. My son's life and a new way to see the world." The emotion in his voice made her heart ache. She reached out and placed a hand over his. "You repaid me long ago," she said softly. "You just didn't notice." He looked at her, confused. "You changed," she said. "You started living with heart. You spend your time helping others. That's worth more than any gift." For a long moment they sat there quietly, watching the stars appear one by one. The silence was peaceful, full of unspoken gratitude and understanding. Finally he said, "You saved my child that day. But you saved me too. You saved me from becoming someone empty." She smiled gently. "And you gave me a reason to believe that one small act can change many lives." The little boy came running out just then, laughing as he carried 2 cups of warm cocoa from the kitchen. "I brought this for you," he said proudly. They both laughed, and she took a cup from his small hands. The man looked at his son, then at her. For a moment, everything felt perfectly complete. Like every hardship, every twist of fate had led to this exact point. As they sat together in the quiet garden, the sound of the city faded away. The night wrapped around them softly, and in that stillness both of them knew some debts are not meant to be paid back with money or gifts. Some are meant to be repaid with kindness, shared purpose, and the promise to keep doing good in the world. The fire that once destroyed a car had started something else entirely. A bond that changed lives. A legacy built not on wealth, but on humanity. And though years would pass, the story of that one brave woman and the man whose life she changed would continue to live in the walls of that clinic, whispered by nurses, told by families, and remembered by every person who found healing there. It was no longer just his way of saying thank you. It was his way of keeping her courage alive, forever.